So we're blessed to live in a world, right, where we don't have to worry about the availability of food, right? We don't have to worry about where our next meal comes from. We have supermarkets, fast food, refrigerators. It's pretty great. But at the same time, it comes with things like diabetes, obesity, cancer, and all those things have been in an uptick in the last few hundred years after the agricultural revolution. And one of the main things about that is the availability of food. So today I want to talk about how intermittent fasting can help you maintain a healthier, cleaner, and more natural lifestyle. Right. So first I'm going to be talking about what intermittent fasting really is. Secondly, I'm going to be talking about the benefits that come with intermittent fasting. And thirdly, I'm going to talk about some testimony from experts as well as debunk some myths surrounding it. So first of all, intermittent fasting is an eating pattern that cycles between periods of fasting and periods of eating. It's pretty simple. It's not a diet. It doesn't specify what foods that you should eat, but rather just when you should eat them. So intermittent fasting also is historically been part of human culture, right? Because as hunter gatherers, you didn't know where your food would come from. So maybe most of the day you'd be looking for food, so you'd be fasting. It's also been used historically in cultures like Islam, Judaism, Christianity. It's been very relevant. Um, Types of IMF programs include daily 16-8, which is every single day fasting for 16 hours and eating for 8, and as well as other programs such as like the 5-2, which is 5 days a week you eat normally and 2 days you severely, you know, reduce your caloric intake. So now that we've covered the basics of what intermittent fasting is, let's get down to the benefits of it, right? So the science behind intermittent fasting, right, and this is from Dr. Monique Tello of the Harvard Health Blog, is that carbohydrates break down in the body to create glucose, right? And our cells will use glucose either right away as energy or store it later for fat. Now, insulin is the hormone that regulates this process, right? And decreasing insulin levels causes cells to not be able to take in glucose as well as to release their glucose to use for energy right away. So periods of fasting will actually decrease our insulin levels, allowing our body to release all our glucose and just and so we're not storing as much of it for fat, right? We're putting our body in a fasted state. Now, a study conducted by UC San Diego, it allowed mice open access to food, right? And they were on a 50% lard and 50% sugar diet, so just not very healthy, right? They had a control group which was allowed to eat whenever they would like, and they had another group that was restricted to a feeding window. And they found over 12 weeks is that the same exact diet, same caloric intake, everything, is that the mice who, were able to eat all day, unregulated, they developed way higher rates of like fatty liver, high cholesterol, pre-diabetic and diabetic symptoms compared to the eating restricted window of mice. A second study, right, done by some Chinese students, and I found it in an academic scientific journal, Plus One. It was an 11-month study done on mice and their mental benefits of intermittent fasting. And the mice on intermittent fasting had better learning and memory, and this was assessed by like the Barnes maze and fear conditioning. And they were also able to observe some physical differences in the brain, like higher amounts of dendritic proteins, thicker pyramidal cell layers, very obscure things. But basically, they figured out that mice on intermittent fasting had better learning and memory. Now, the other mental effects of fasting, right, according to Dr. Axe, is that they mimic those of starvation, right? And that might sound rough, but what he calls them is positive stressors, just like exercise, right? So if anyone has ever gone on a long workout, you know that even when you push your body, your mind feels better. You feel more refreshed afterwards, you feel more motivated, and the same goes for fasting. Now, another benefit is that if you are looking to diet, it is probably the easiest way to maintain a diet. You're eating less meals, so you're prepping less and you're cooking less. You don't have to think about as much of what you're putting into your body because you're only eating 2 meals a day or however many meals. And then obviously you can lower your caloric intake pretty easily by only eating a couple meals a day, and having more meals in a smaller eating period actually makes you feel like you're eating more throughout the day. So obviously the benefit in mice is seen scientifically, and I know what you guys are thinking, like, oh, thank God I'm a mouse, so this really applies to me. But now let's talk about some human testimony and some myths surrounding IMF. So Stanford Dr. John Trepanowski, he is a research fellow at the Stanford Preventional Research Center. He stated that caloric restriction is by far the most effective diet for improving health in the last like 10, 15 years. And he says even without any of the mice studies that IMF is the most effective way to reduce caloric intake. So if you want to disregard all the scientific studies done, then There we go. That's all that matters. Is having less meals will make it easier to maintain a better diet and be healthier, right? So besides all the doctors that I've mentioned, there are also a lot of celebrities that practice intermittent fasting, right? And that's like Terry Crews, Beyonce, Hugh Jackman, Nicole Kidman, Jennifer Lopez, and also if you guys watch Fighting, George St. Pierre. Recently credited his really big comeback at the age of like 35 to intermittent fasting. And all those people obviously look really good, so they're doing something right. Some false myths surrounding IMF, right? Fasting is not the same as starving, right? Everyone's like, oh man, if you put your body in a starved state, you're just gonna hold on to all your fat, No, absolutely not, because fasting is very different from starving. Starving only happens after like 30 days without food, right? And you don't need to take it that far. Secondly, people will say that fasting reduces muscle density, right? And that is not true either, because your body either uses fat or sugar as energy, and only after they burn through that will it start burning through muscle. And our bodies, according to Dr. Stephanie Estima, have about 50,000 to 100,000 calories worth of fat on the body. So it's gonna take 30 days for you to start doing that. Malnourishment is also a concern, but like I said earlier, this is not a diet. It doesn't tell you what to eat. It only tells you when to eat. So you can keep your exact same diet and you'll be fine. So, intermittent fasting, like I said, is an alternative eating schedule that is actually healthier and more natural for us as humans. It's not a diet, doesn't tell you when to eat, only tells you when to eat. It has scientific benefits both physically and mentally, and it's a popular eating schedule that has been getting a lot of traction throughout both the scientific world as well as like the celebrity community. There's literally no downside to it. I really stress that everyone try it. In the words of George St. Pierre, he says, during the day when you're working and being active, would you rather be like a full lazy lion? Like, have you tried to get work done after eating? Like, no, it's impossible. But you'd rather be like a hungry lion. And I think that's just a really good analogy. Okay, that was my speech, and I hope everyone has a great day.